Hello, my name is Charles Chestnut. Did you know that the turtle was once the explanation for the world? The scientists of the day saw that the horizon was slightly curved, so they imagined that the world was a dome sitting on the back of a giant turtle. But, as always, there were skeptics and detractors who challenged their theory. They asked, well, if the whole thing is sitting on the back of a giant turtle, then what's the turtle sitting on? Pretty good question. That's easy, responded the scientists. It's turtles all the way down. The turtle explanation was a product of imagination, perhaps because the science of the day rejected the scriptural explanation. The scriptural explanation is found in Job 26:7. God stretches the northern sky over empty space and hangs the earth upon nothing. Whoever inspired that statement knew that the sky was empty space and that the earth is indeed hung upon nothing. Good science uses neither imagination nor belief. It uses hard evidence. It uses what is called the scientific method. The scientific method is simple. It teaches that all conclusions should be drawn from observation and observation alone. In other words, we should make a conclusion from what we observe and not from what we believe, and not for the purpose of fitting it into a preconceived theory or to conform to a religious belief. The scientific method in its purest form is a form of inquiry that ensures that the conclusions will be drawn directly from the evidence alone. This is an excellent definition of the scientific theory, which you can look up yourself in Wikipedia. The scientific method is an empirical method of acquiring knowledge that has characterized the development of science since at least the 17th century. It involves careful observation, applying rigorous skepticism about what is observed, given that cognitive assumptions can distort how one interprets the observation. Notice the last part of this definition. Given that cognitive assumptions can distort how one interprets the observation. The scientific method excludes cognitive assumptions because they can distort how one interprets the observation. A cognitive assumption is a preconceived belief that distorts how one interprets what has been observed. For instance, if someone claims to be an authority and he states that God created life because he firmly believes it, that person may have faith, but this is not science. He believes that the Creator exists, so evolution must be false. He's basing his science upon a theological conclusion rather than the evidence itself. The same is true for the atheist. He believes that God does not exist, so evolution has to be true, even if there's no evidence to support it. That man also has departed from established science, and he is basing his science on his theological conclusion rather than the evidence itself. Here's a quote from the foremost evolutionist in England. His name is Richard Dawkins. Even if there were no actual evidence in favor of the Darwinian theory, we would still be justified in preferring it over rival theories. Look at this. Is that an example of an open-minded scientific method? I think not. His point, of course, was that even if there's no evidence for evolution, then creationism is still unconvincing. Why did he say that? Because Dawkins, as well as the entire evolution community, begins with the premise that there is no creator. But a belief about the existence or the non-existence of a creator is not science. It is theology. If one carefully considers the evidence alone and then concludes that the evidence alone indicates that there is a creator or indicates that there isn't a creator, then that is the scientific method, because it is the evidence that forms the basis of the conclusion, not belief. Unfortunately, as seen from the Dawkins quote, that is not the approach taken by evolutionists of today. The evolution community of today takes the non-existence of the Creator as a given. It is a premise to their articles, to their studies, and to their experiments. In every single article, no matter what the evidence shows, you will always find a nod to evolution and the implicit rejection of the Creator and a totally ignoring the possibility of a creator. This approach, ironically, is diametrically opposed to Darwin, who was far more objective. This is what Darwin said. If it could be demonstrated that any complex organ could not have been formed by numerous successive slight modifications, my theory would absolutely break down. Do you see how Darwin goes to the evidence and how Dawkins ignores it? Darwin does not depart from the scientific method. He is quick to say that he could be proven wrong. Darwin's approach was honest. He was telling us to look at the evidence. If the evidence shows that any complex organ could not be formed by slight successive modifications, then Darwin admits that his theory would absolutely break down. Did you know that Scripture does the same thing? Yes, Scripture advocates the scientific method, just as Darwin did. Let's look at Romans 1:20. For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood through what has been made. Scripture is telling us that we need to look no further than what we can observe in nature to prove the Creator's existence. Faith is not required to see God in His creation. Faith is the result of what we see in nature, not the cause. So faith is not and should not be part of an inquiry based upon the scientific method. A leap of faith is not required to prove that God is a creator. The only thing necessary to prove that God is the creator is objectivity a mind that is neither burdened nor directed by any prejudice toward either outcome, a mind that is willing to suspend both belief and disbelief in a creator in order to look at the evidence and the evidence alone. Do you have the courage, as either a Christian or an evolutionist, do you have the courage to do that? Just for a moment. I challenge you solely for the purpose of honoring your own intellect. Come with me for a moment and take this step. Wipe the slate clean and look at the evidence alone. And then, in the silence of your mind, ask yourself, is it reasonable to conclude that life was created by a creator, or did it happen as the result of accidental mutations and natural selection? Well, okay, let's start with the human brain. Evolution teaches that the brain began with a one-celled organism, several one-celled organisms that by chance possessed most of the components necessary for one cell to communicate with another. Accidental genetic changes then altered the cells so that they did communicate with each other. This communication resulted in a generation of cells being better able to survive and predominate because of the advantages provided by the communication. Of course, there's no evidence that this actually occurred, if it did occur. There's no evidence because it was supposed to have occurred millions of years ago. Then more accidents theoretically happened, and some of the cells became specialized for carrying messages. During this time, random accidental mutations were constructing a non-physical code that the cells could use to talk to one another. Also, the random mutations in the cells were creating the mechanism to receive and translate the messages. Then the random mutations changed some of the cells to produce an extension, a primitive wire, so to speak, that would eventually carry an electrical charge. Now, none of these cells had a brain, and none of them could figure out what they wanted to say, but the mutations just kept on changing things around until finally all the cells started growing wires and sending and receiving messages. This is the evolutionary explanation for the beginning and the evolving of a brain. There's no evidence for it. It's only theory. Then, as generations passed and each successive generation had a better ability to survive, and more physical codes, more non-physical codes were developed by random mutations, these codes enabled the brain to communicate with different parts of itself. Eventually, it became self-aware, and it could think. It could store memories, experience emotions, it could build and create and reason, and it could love. And what hard evidence do we have that mutations constructed the brain? There is none. It's all theory. So let's look at the evidence. Let's look at what we do have and see if the evidence points to Creator creating the brain, or whether it points to random mutations creating the brain. So what is this brain anyway? What is this? What is physically inside your head? Dr. Douglas Fields, the chief of nervous system development and plasticity of the National Institute of Child Health and Human Development, tells us that inside the head are 170,000 kilometers of wiring. Converted to miles, this is 109,361 miles of wires. Ladies and gentlemen, that is enough wire to wrap around the earth 4 times. And all of it is perfectly placed. All allegedly by random mutations in genetic structure. Do you believe that? Michael Denton, a renowned biochemist, measures the brain not by its miles of wiring, but by the number of its connections, all of which have a specific purpose and are timed down to the nanosecond. He says the number of connections in the human brain is approximately 1,000 trillion. Imagine an immense forest that stretches over half the United States. A single forest that covers 1 million square miles. Each square mile contains 10,000 trees, and each tree contains 100,000 leaves. Imagine the vast number of trees in such a forest. The number of organized electrical connections in your brain is approximately equal to the number of leaves on those trees. Imagine an uninterrupted forest, just like the one in this picture. It's roughly the size of continental Europe or the size of Saudi Arabia. Evolution is telling you that amazing invisible mutations that are entirely theoretical installed a wire between each one of those leaves and organized the entire structure to be able to think. What actual evidence do we have for accidental genetic changes doing this? None. But the amazing mutations must have done it, they say, because the evolutionist theology has already determined that there is no creator. Evolutionists themselves, of course, are amazed at what they see. And they see the need to explain what they see in order to defend their theory. Dr. Lahn tells us, it is nothing short of spectacular that so many mutations in so many genes were acquired during the mere 20 to 25 million years of time in the evolutionary lineage leading to humans. This means that natural selection had worked extra hard during human evolution to create the powerful brain that exists in humans. Notice that evolution's explanation never mentions even the possibility of a creator, but always, in this one as well as all others, explains that to create a computer of that magnitude, the mutations must have worked extra hard. The possibility that the amazing mutations did not construct a supercomputer is never given a thought because it's not an issue. It is not an issue because the evidence is irrelevant. And creators are not allowed under any circumstances whatever. So just how hard is it? How extra hard is it if random mutations created the brain in 25 million years, then this is at the rate of 109,589 new connections every day. That's about 1 connection per second with no errors for 25 million years straight. That's about 3/4 of an inch of new wiring every day. Now, evolution, of course, is measured not in terms of minutes and seconds and days, but in terms of generations. And changes are not supposed to be both beneficial, are supposed to be both beneficial and detrimental. So you're getting good changes and bad changes, and then the good ones are selected by natural selection. Ladies and gentlemen, that just does not square with the evidence here. Do you need more time, Mr. Evolutionist? What about 4 billion years? In 4 billion years, the rate goes down to one fully evolved, timed, installed, and perfected connection every 2 minutes with no errors. Again, the evidence does not square with the theory. The hand of the Creator is obvious from what He has created. He does not need blind faith or a PhD from an atheist university. All He needs is an objective, honest look at what He has created. But as far as creation goes, buckle your seatbelts, folks, because my friends, you ain't seen nothing yet. Those amazing mutations, you know what else they did? They figured out a way to record the memories of a lifetime in the arrangement of the charges or the differentiation between individual molecules. Memories are written in code by altering the characteristics of each successive molecule. Taken together, these findings suggest the most likely unit of information storage during learning is not the neuron itself, but rather the molecules that compose it, that comprise it. Each successive molecule is different from the next by the addition or the removal of a phosphoryl group of atoms. This is one theory of how the molecules are differentiated. There are others. The addition or the removal of the phosphoryl group does not alter the function of the molecule. All it does is serve to differentiate one molecule from another. It's like the ones and zeros in a computer code. So we're no longer simply referring to the number of leaves on the trees in the forest the size of the United States, half the United States. We're talking orders of magnitude larger than that. We are talking trillions upon trillions of individual molecules. In your brain, there is a mechanism that alters each individual molecule one by one to make it different from the next one so that the on-off characteristics of each molecule can be used to write a code. There is a non-physical code that records memories. Lumen is an internet textbook that summarizes current science. It, and numerous others, tells us that memory is a code. Think about this for a minute. This is not like a film clip from a home movie. It's a code. In the same way your cell phone records video by means of a code that is made up of ones and zeros or possibly something else. Some researchers call it a construct. No one really knows exactly how it is, whether it's binary or not, but it's there. The code is written on the memory and played back by a computer, the brain, that has been programmed to read the code. Where did the code come from? Did random genetic mutations write a non-physical code? And then there's not just one memory code, there are 4. They are visual, acoustic, elaborative, and semantic. Each code records a different type of memory. Visual memory code is the code for memories that you see. Acoustic memory is the code for memory that you hear. Elaborative memory is the code for how memories relate to one another, as when information that is already known is related to the new information being experienced. And semantic memory is the code for sensory input that has a specific meaning or can be applied to a context. Like a memory of a particular food by its color or the sound that you associate with someone or something. Did random mutations figure all that out? How did accidental mutations invent 4 codes that record different kinds of memory and interact with each other? But writing the code is only part of the story. What is truly astounding is that the mutations figure out a way to index trillions of coded molecules to enable you to pull up a memory at the whim of a thought. Do you remember your first kiss? Your first embrace? Do you remember the warmth of your baby's cheek or your grandmother's face? It's in there somewhere, written in code. But where? Where among trillions upon trillions of molecules can you find it? Which molecule is the first of the sequence and which one is the end? Where are they? No one knows how a thought can locate a memory. But there is one study that addressed a significant element of how this is done. MIT scientists discovered that the mutations constructed a mechanism to timestamp the memories. This is what they said. An MIT team led by Institute Professor Anne Graybiel has found groups of neurons in the primitive brain that code time with extreme precision. Quote, all you do is stamp everything. And then recalling events is easy. You just go back through and look through your timestamps until you see which ones are correlated with the event, she says. Well, so do the mutations know how to tell time? And tell time with extreme precision? Of course not. Mutations are nothing but accidental genetic changes that happen to happen. So how can they timestamp memories? The evolutionists will tell you that the mutations just continued to happen over and over again until they accidentally wrote binary code that could record memories, remember history, mathematics, love and logic, creativity and emotion, and tell time with extreme precision. Record the time by placing timestamps on the memory codes and index trillions of molecules so that you can locate a memory with a thought. Something created memory. Either millions of extremely fortunate accidents created it, or a creator created it. If any reasonable person believes that memory happened by accident, in order to do that, he must first conclude that a creator does not exist. And that, of course, is a theological position. One reason why evolutionists are certain that there is no creator is because they have not found him. But did you ever consider, Mr. Evolutionist, that the Creator simply does not wish to be found by you? Perhaps He chooses to disclose Himself only to those who love Him and obey Him, exactly the way Jesus describes Him in John 14:21. He says, "He who has my commandments," that person who has my commandments and keeps them, that person is the one who loves me. And he who loves me will be loved by my Father. And I will love him and will disclose myself to him. Are you one of those people who has his commandments and keeps them, Mr. Evolutionist? Do you preach that he does not exist? Perhaps that's why you don't know him. Do you base your life on the bet that God does not exist? Do you? What happens if you lose the bet? Think about it. But as far as creation goes, folks, you ain't seen nothing yet. Let's look at vision. Vision produces an ultra-high resolution, three-dimensional, moving color picture with instant automatic focus and instantaneous execution with no perceptible delay between the occurrence and the perception. It has low light compensation, a mechanism for self-repair, self-defense against infection, and nerves that create exactly the right amount of electricity necessary to transmit signals in code from the eye to the brain. Vision is transmitted to the brain via code just like everything else in the brain. The brain receives the code transmitted by 126 million photoreceptors. That's 63 million in each retina. The code transmits the codes. The nerves transmits the codes from millions of colors, and they all change each time the eye moves. So the brain may receive millions of signals in the space of a second or less. It processes these signals instantaneously and creates an electrical awareness of a full motion, full color, three-dimensional representation of an external reality to which it is not connected. And all of this process is accomplished by a living computer that computes at a speed of 124 trillion. Can you say that again? 124 trillion organized computations in the space of 1/25th of a second. 1/25th of a second is the duration of the click of an old box camera. Accidents do not devise code, nor do they program computers. K is one of the 5 most powerful computers in the world. Its name derives from the Japanese word K, which means 10 quadrillion, which is the approximate number of computations that K performs in 1 second. K has 705,024 processor cores that run simultaneously. It uses 1,400 terabytes of memory and consumes the same amount of electricity as 10,000 suburban homes. K is massive. It's measured by the number of aisles of computer machinery. An international team of programmers spent approximately 4 years programming K. Their goal was to simulate the computing power of 1% of the human brain for 1 second. Their programming mirrored the connections between 173 billion nerve cells connected to 10.4 trillion synapses. When it was finished, they loaded the program and clicked Go. K began to hum and the program was successful. Yes, the program simulated 1% of the processing power of the human brain for 1 second. The only problem was that it took K 40 minutes to do it. Well, if you start comparing that, there's 2,400 seconds in 40 minutes. So 1% of the brain computes at a speed that is 2,400 times the speed of K. And that's 1% of the brain. So if you take into account that this is only 1%, the human brain is 240,000 times as powerful as K. In 1/25 of a second, K completes 52 billion computations. In the same period of time, 1/100th of your brain has completed 124 trillion computations, if you want to figure that out mathematically. 1/25th of a second is the time that it takes for the shutter to click on an old box camera. Click, and it's done. It took a team of programmers almost 4 years to complete the programming of 1 second of the computations done by 1/100th of the brain. And evolutionists are telling you that K was programmed by intelligent programmers, but your brain was not. It was programmed by amazing and extremely fortunate accidents that have never been observed. If you honor your own intellect by looking at this evidence with total objectivity and remove all prior religious beliefs, both for and against a creator, it's obvious that the brain must have been constructed by an intelligent source rather than random chance. Also, about 10 years ago, evolutionists thought that they were going to prove evolution beyond all doubt. But what they found was exactly the opposite. They found the very hand of the Creator and could not see it. The whole thing had to do with gene mapping. Gene mapping is when scientists draw a picture of the genes in an animal or a human and identify them and find out what each one of them does. This means that with gene mapping, evolutionists can compare the same gene in 2 animals of the same species because each one of them have the same map and the same gene. So they can look at one gene in one species and another gene, the same gene in another species, and see if it's changed. This is important because evolution is all about changes in genes within the same species. If they can show that a gene is mutated and that mutation has improved the chances of survival, this can be used to prove evolution. Okay. So what's a gene anyway? Genes are groups of molecules that are a code. Like letters are arranged to form words, the arrangement of the molecules in a gene means something. A gene is coded instructions for the building of amino acids and proteins and other essential chemicals in the body. And there are at least 20,000 different human genes. Evolutionists believe that accidental mutations wrote the code for all of them, and that evolution is continually improving the code. So there should be improved, mutated genes all over the animal world. However, until gene mapping was discovered, there was no way to prove it, because no one knew which gene did what. Evolutionists were happy to see gene mapping because they believed that they could finally prove evolution once and for all. But that has not happened. And failed evolution experiments are rarely published. For instance, what if gene mapping could show that an accidental mutation made a change in an animal that enabled it to speak? That would be significant because a talking animal would mean a new species. But there are no talking animals, even though evolution is supposed to be everywhere. Animals communicate, but they do not speak. One of the most important gene mapping experiments was the study of an octopus. There are two types of the same species of octopus. One type lives in the warm waters of Hawaii, and the other lives in the frigid waters of the Antarctic. Although both of them are the same species of octopus, the warm water octopus dies when it is placed in cold water. Why? That was the question. Experiments showed that the cold water slowed the nerve impulses of the warm water octopus so much that it could not survive. But the cold water octopus had a different kind of amino acid in its nerves. The amino acid in the cold water octopus sped up the nerve transmission enough to permit the cold water octopus to survive. Whereas the amino acid in the warm water octopus did not do so. So the warm water octopus died in cold water. But the amino acid in both types of octopus came from the same gene, and that was proved by gene mapping. So with gene mapping, evolutionists could compare the two genes and show that the gene for the cold water octopus had mutated and given the cold water octopus a survival advantage. This would be hard proof in favor of evolution. So they mapped the genes. They mapped the gene that produced the amino acid in each octopus, and then they compared the genes to show how the gene in the cold water octopus had mutated to produce a different kind of amino acid. But what they found was not at all what they expected. What they found was that the gene had not mutated. Both genes contain the code for the warm water amino acid. But the warm water gene produced the cold water amino acid in the cold water octopus. How can that be? The evolutionists discovered that each time the cells of the cold water octopus made a copy of the gene, of the warm water gene, they held it back from production and reprogrammed it to produce the cold water amino acid. Let me say that again. The evolutionists discovered that each time the cells of the cold water octopus made a copy of the warm water gene, they held it back and reprogrammed it to produce the cold water amino acid. I'm going to see the quote here on the screen. So here we have a mechanism inside the cell that shows how to reprogram genes to produce exactly the right kind of amino acid. It's like the scripture that we quoted earlier that says that the earth is hung upon nothing. Whoever inspired that scripture had to know that the earth does indeed hang upon nothing. It is suspended in space. And whoever built the mechanism for reprogramming the amino acid gene had to know what the proper amino acid was, how to construct it, what its chemical formula was, and what the code for that amino acid was. What are the chances that random chance wrote the DNA code for 20,000 complicated chemicals? Mathematically, there is no chance. It is mathematically impossible. Suppose we consider a gene that has 20 different instructions. And there are many genes that are larger than that. And let's assume that there's only one correct arrangement in that particular gene. There is a mathematical formula to determine how many different arrangements there are of the instructions in that gene. So if you determine how many different arrangements there are and one of them is the one you need, you know the chances of obtaining that one by random changing of the gene. The formula is 1 times 2 times 3 times 4 all the way to 20. Let's start with just 4 different instructions. When there are 4 different instructions, there are 24 different ways to arrange them. So random chance has 1 chance in 24 to strike on the right arrangement. We determine that number with the formula 1 times 2 times 3 times 4, that equals 24. That is, there are 24 different arrangements. So to strike on the right one, by chance, the chances are 1 in 24. What if there are 5 instructions in the code? Well, that would be 1 times 2 times 3 times 4 times 5, and that equals 120. If there are 5 instructions in the code, then random chance would have 1 chance in 120 to come up with the right arrangements. If there's 6 instructions, the chances are 1 in 720. If there's 7 instructions, the chances are 1 in 5,040. If there are 8 instructions, the chances are 1 in 40,320. Now, you may find that what I'm going to show you now is rather unbelievable, so you may wish to visit our website at creationdesign.org and click on Chances of a Particular Arrangement. And there you'll find a graphic representation that shows how and why this commonly known formula works. But for now, let's go on and look at the chances of an accidental arrangement for just 20 instructions. If there are 12 instructions in the code, the chances of getting the right one are 1 in 479,001,600. If there are 15 instructions, the chances of getting it right are 1 in 1 trillion. If there are 18 instructions, the chances of getting it right are more than 6 quadrillion. And when you get to 20 instructions, you are off the chart. Six quadrillion is approximately 3 times the number of seconds in 4 billion years. Those amazing mutations are going to have to work extra hard to construct a gene with 18 instructions. And there are 20,000 genes, and all of them are right. The largest gene is called CRX. It has 23,551 instructions. There is no name for that number, the number of chances that that gene would be written by accident. It's certainly true that there are mitigating factors with this analysis. For instance, a gene may have several of the same instructions, or some genes may not have just one possible arrangement. But it's very doubtful if those factors would reduce the chances of 20,000 different genes down to a workable number. Now let's look at what Darwin said again. If it could be demonstrated that any complex organ could not have been formed by numerous slight modifications, my theory would absolutely break down. These numbers and this evidence show exactly that. 3 billion elements to the DNA code did not and could not have happened by numerous successive slight modifications. Now let's look at Dawkins again. Even if there are no actual evidence in favor of the Darwinian theory, we would still be justified in preferring it over rival theories. Do you see how close-minded that is? And that is the approach of all evolutionists. We are always right and there is no creator no matter what the evidence shows. Accidents did not construct a living computer with as many organized, installed, and timed connections as the leaves on the trees in a forest the size of continental Europe. Nor did beneficial mutations program that computer to compute at a speed of 124 trillion computations in the time that it takes for the shutter to click on a box camera. How many actual beneficial mutations have actually been observed? How many? One estimate was about 150. The consensus among evolutionists, and of course many people had different thoughts and opinions, I have not seen anything more than that number. The consensus among evolutionists, though, is that beneficial mutations are rare. How then did evolution proceed at the rate of 109,589 perfected new and installed connections in the brain every day for 25 million years with no errors? The answer is that it didn't. Nor did it devise a code to record memory or the code for 20,000 chemical formulas and then write the formulas into the atoms of a molecule. Once the prejudice against the Creator is lifted, the evidence is clear as day. It is exactly as Scripture says. The earth is hung upon nothing, and the hand of the Creator is evident in all that He has made. And they are without excuse. Visit our website, creationdesign.org and biblebooks.co, and come back to see us soon. Thank you for listening.